Welcome back! Now, after months of working on all of these little squares, we're finally at the point where we get to join everything together, and it's so exciting. So let's get started. Alright, so today I'm going to be showing you how to take all of the little squares that we've made for our Tunisian Sampler Afghan and turning it into one large blanket. We're going to be using the same 6mm hook that we used to make our sample squares. Now, if you are new to the series and this is the first video you're watching, there's a whole playlist for all 30 squares. They're all different stitches. I'm going to link that down in the description box below the video, or you can see it here at the very top of the screen. So the border we're going to be adding is just a single crochet border, but you can't really see too well with the blue. So let me show you with one of the burgundy squares maybe. So here you go. We're going to be adding a small border to each of the squares that we've already crocheted. You are going to need to weave in your ends before you add the border. And for those of you that are a little bit more advanced, you're just going to be making a single crochet border. So all along the edge, just single crochet. And in the corners, you're going to single crochet 3 stitches. So on each of the 2 rows. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, we're going to be crocheting that together. So I'll show you how to do that step by step. The first thing you're going to need is one of your squares. Now, if you're wondering about blocking, we're going to talk about blocking after I show you how to do the border. Blocking is entirely optional, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. We're going to begin by skipping the cornermost stitch and inserting your hook into the stitch right after that. Then you're going to get your yarn whatever color you want for your border. Leave a nice tail end, you can weave that in later, and you're going to pull that through. Next, you're going to chain 1. So just drop the yarn you're not using, so the tail end. So yarn over and pull through 1. Tighten that up. And the beginning of the stitch right after that, you're going to single crochet along every stitch at the top part of the square. So go into your next stitch, insert your hook, yarn over and pull up a loop. Once you have 2 loops on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull through both of these loops. So we're going to the next stitch and just repeat. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and when you have 2 loops on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull through both loops. Repeat this in every stitch until you get to the corner stitch. Now, keep in mind that all of your stitches are going to look a little bit different. So some stitches are going to be a little bit easier to identify than others, but just make sure that you space all of your single crochets evenly and you should be just fine. Once you reach the corner, so I've got 1 stitch and then I will reach the cornermost stitch here. So you're going to single crochet 3 into that same corner stitch. So here's the corner stitch. We're going to single crochet 1. And then in that same stitch, we're going to single crochet a 2nd and a 3rd stitch. This is going to give us a nice little corner and bring us around to the other side. To make your cornermost stitch a little bit easier to identify for your second round, you can use a stitch marker or a safety pin, whatever you have on hand, and just find the middle stitch. So remember, we just did 3. So find the centermost stitch and place your stitch marker there. This is going to be the corner stitch for your next round. Now, once you turn your work to the side, you're going to do the same process that we did for the top part of our square. So you're just going to single crochet into every stitch along the side of your square. Your corners, you're going to do them all the same. So they're all going to have 3 single crochets. Again, you can use your stitch marker to help you identify what the cornermost stitch is going to be. But go all the way around your square, and then I'll see you at the other side. Once you've crocheted completely around your square, you're going to get back to this corner stitch. You're going to do your 3 single crochets, and then you're going to find that first little chain 1 that you did at the beginning of the round, or I guess the beginning of the square, the round, whatever you want to call it. Find the stitch that's right above that chain 1. You're going to insert your hook and single crochet. And then you begin your second round. So this is going to be exactly the same as your first round. So single crochet into all of the stitches along the sides, at the top, the bottom of the square, and then in the corners, you're going to single crochet 3. For those of you that need to see the corner one more time, here it is. So here's our stitch marker. We're going to single crochet into the stitch right before the stitch marker, which I'm having a bit of a losing battle with here. We're going to single crochet here, and then once you get to your stitch marker, this is going to be the corner stitch, so you're going to single crochet 3 into this same stitch. Once you've worked your way completely around the square, you're going to need to crochet your 2 single crochets right after the corner stitch. So one here and then one in the stitch right next to it. So we're going to single crochet one here. We're going to single crochet one in the next stitch. And then to close the round, you're just going to slip stitch. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then pull the top loop through the bottom loop and chain 1. The chain 1 is going to make a small knot here at the bottom. Leave a little tail end of yarn. You're going to weave this in here in just a minute. But there you go. This is the same border that you're going to use for every single one of your squares. Now keep in mind that it is going to change a little bit depending on the square that you crochet because we used different stitches. Space out your stitching and you will be just fine. For those of you that don't know how to weave in your ends, you're going to take your yarn or tapestry needle, and then I like to work in the back part of the square or the back part of my project. You're just going to thread one of the 2 threads of yarn through, and then you're going to sew kind of in a bit of a square shape. So just like you see here on the screen. So this is one of those things that, you can watch it and kind of get the gist of it. So I'm just going to play some nice music and you can just watch me weave in the ends. You are going to have to do this with every tail end of yarn that you have for every single one of your squares. All right, so let's talk about blocking. Now, if you notice, our squares are different sizes. Yes, that has to do with the stitching and sometimes just my lack of foresight. I'm not going to be blocking my blanket, so you'll be able to take a look at what that's going to look like if you choose not to block it. However, I'm going to show you 2 different methods you can use for any of you guys interested in actually, going through the process of blocking all of these and making the squares the same size. If you have a foam board, it's a little bit easier to block. It is not necessary. I'll show you a different way you can, or a different method you can use if you don't have one. But for those of you that do, you use your little foam board, and I like to place a towel on it. And this is if you're going to be using I guess both methods. If you're going to be using the damp method or if you're going to be using a steamer. So if you're going to be using the damp method, make sure you wash all your little squares and leave them damp. So don't throw them in the dryer or anything, just leave them nice and damp. And then we're going to pin these onto the board. If you plan to steam this, then leave your little squares nice and dry. You're going to pin them onto the board, and then you're going to be using your steamer. So place it along, wherever you want on your board and just using any kind of pins. Start shaping your square. I recommend that you use the largest square that you have from all of your 30 samples as the guide, and then make the other squares the same size. They do make, I guess there are several companies that make specialized pins for blocking projects. I just use regular sewing pins, and that's always worked out just fine. All right, now if you don't have a foam board, you can just use a towel. So you're going to fold a towel into quarters. So it's just a regular bath towel, and I folded it over 4 times, and that'll make a nice thick fabric, as you can see here. And you should be able to pin your, what is it called? Your little squares. There we go. You should be able to pin your squares and block them just fine without having to use a board. So once your squares are pinned, if you're using the damp method, then just let them dry overnight. You're going to repeat the same process with all of your squares. So make sure you block all of them, let them dry, and then you'll be ready to crochet this the next day. If you're going to be using a steamer or an iron, because you can use just regular iron, your iron is going to need to have a steam option. So it's going to be this little icon here at the very top. You're going to have to turn the iron to the hottest setting, and then you're going to hold it over your project and steam it. So this next part is, I promise I'm not trying to be facetious. I get this question a lot when it comes to blocking projects, so I thought I would just do a short little clip on it. Hold your iron maybe about 1 inch, or which is about 3 centimeters away from your work. If you pull it too close to your project, you might burn it. So all you want is the steam to loosen up the stitches, and that will help block your project. Now the next part is, once your squares are blocked, if you choose to do that, and they are all dry and ready to go, you just arrange them however you want them to be. If you're doing what I'm doing and you're just not going to block them at all, then just make the border on all of them, weave in all of your ends, and start arranging them in whatever order it is that you want. I didn't follow the stitch order that we worked on, so I didn't set it, 1 through 30. In fact, I didn't even set 30 blocks because I lost 5 of them, and I have no idea where they went. So I only have 25 squares on my blanket. But just rearrange your squares however it is you want, the way that you like best, and then we'll go on and move on to the stitching. To keep my squares in order while I stitch them, I just lay them out the way I wanted to lay out the blanket, and then just pick them up, as you see here in the video, in columns. So these are going to be the columns that I'm going to stitch together, and I'll show you how in just a bit. But I just went through, picked them up, left them in order, and then I just did not move them until I was done stitching the columns. After that, once you stitch the rows, it's already stitched together for the most part, so you'll be just fine. To join our squares, we're going to be using a single crochet. So find the topmost corner of the squares, just kind of like how you see here. And this is how you're going to insert your hook. It's going to be through the front of your first square and the back of your second square. Now you're going to yarn over in whatever yarn you want to use to join them. Leave a tail end, you'll weave this in later, and then just pull through both of those stitches. From here, you're going to chain 1. And now you're just going to single crochet along the side. So it's easier if you just line them up like this. If your squares, I guess if you blocked them, your squares will be about the same size. If you didn't, you might have a little bit of a size difference, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But to single crochet, insert your hook through the front of the first square and then through the back of the second square, yarn over and pull up a loop. Once you have your 2 loops, you're going to yarn over and pull through 2. So just continue to single crochet until you get to the next corner. Now, because not all of our squares have the same number of rows, you might have one square that has a few more stitches than the other. So in order to compensate for the size difference, you might have to double up your single crochets in one stitch. Now, let's say that this green square is shorter than the yellow square by a few stitches. What we're going to do is we're going to insert our hook into the stitch that we just worked into. So pick a stitch, you're going to single crochet 2 into that stitch, but in the yellow square, you're going to scoot to the next available stitch. And then you're going to single crochet. So you single crochet 2 on the green side, which is the shorter side, and then 1 on the next available stitch in the yellow. So give it a few more stitches, and then if you need to double up again, do so at different intervals along the square. So space them apart so that your fabric doesn't bunch up. You shouldn't be off by very many stitches. It should be maybe about 3 or 4 at the most. But by using this method, you should be able to have squares that are about the same size. Now, once you reach the corner, we're going to have to join in the next 2 squares for our column. So insert your hook into the corner stitches and single crochet. When you're ready to add the next 2 squares, so here's what our project looks like so far. So when you're ready to add the next 2 squares, just set them the same way that you would set your 2 original squares. So line them up however it is you want. Make sure that your stitch is facing the direction in which you want it to face. And then we're just going to continue to single crochet along the side of the stitching. So again, you're going to have to find the cornermost stitches of the next pair of squares and single crochet, just like you did for the first squares. If you're holding the squares really close to your face, you might notice that there is going to be a lot of space in between the stitches. So use a flat surface, hold your squares against the flat surface. That way you can eliminate this spacing between the squares. And you won't have, that really big stitch. So once you do your first single crochet and maybe about 2 or 3 more, you can pick up your work again and then, hold it up as close as you need or however it is that you need to hold it to crochet comfortably. Continue adding squares to your columns, however many squares that you wanted down. So if you wanted 5 squares down on the column or you wanted 6, just continue joining them the same way that we were joining them before. Now once you get to the rows, you're also going to single crochet just like we did for the columns. The only thing is going to be once you reach the corner on one side, so once you reach this end, you're going to single crochet on one side and then you just skip to the next corner. So if you're crocheting the green and the blue square, get to the corner of the green and blue square and then just skip over to the corner of the yellow and the burgundy square and continue to single crochet. And because you can't really see this in the photo, here's a look at what that single crochet seam looks like. So it's a little bit raised. Now this is going to be on the front side of the blanket, and here's how it looks in the back. You can switch your squares around, so if you'd rather the seam to look the way it does here on the back side, then just single crochet on the back side of the blanket, but that part of the design is entirely up to you. Once you've joined all of your squares, remember to weave in all of your tail ends. Your blanket's going to look a little like this. From here, you can add a border, and it's going to be the same border that you used for each of the squares, but you can make it as thick or as wide as you want to. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see any more of my work, you can always stop by the shop. I'll put the link down in the description box below, or you can follow me on Instagram. I'll see you all again in the next tutorial.